Dana White is an undeniably complicated character. And I say character because I have no doubt that his role in the UFC is based purely around the company. And almost every word that comes out of his mouth is laced with the UFC's ulterior motives and tactics. Very rarely does the human shine through, and when he does try to push that, it's often with another ulterior motive or tactic in mind. And you can learn a lot about how Dana operates through these 4 interactions with some of his best known fighters and how they played out. He is a promoter by trade, yes, but that doesn't mean that Dana's sole focus will always be on pushing these athletes and their brands. No, the UFC itself is the brand. That's the thing he's promoting. The fighters, in a lot of cases, are a lot more expendable than you might think. So let's just jump in and dive into Dana's approach, as seen in 4 examples. Tyron Woodley. Looking back on it now, the Tyron Woodley era of the welterweight division was a truly odd one. On paper, this was a highly athletic champion who managed to beat some uniquely difficult matchups using a style that could literally only be pulled off by someone like him. No one was beating Wonderboy or Demian Maia at 170 pounds until Woodley managed to do so. He was a champion who was totally unwilling to bend in his adherence to a game plan, even if it cost him in other ways. And look, his complaining and general attitude, I believe, though annoying, were a result of the sheer weight of being a public figure who was that widely disliked. It was kind of a chicken and egg situation though. But Dana's role as a promoter here tells you everything you need to know about him. Tyron was a long-time champion at welterweight, and in that time he produced 2 great finishes of Darren Till and Robbie Lawler to initially win the belt. He also had a great first fight against Stephen Wonderboy Thompson at UFC 205. It was the Maia and Thompson rematch that were the problem. Now, the way the UFC is structured, if you're champ, there's a pretty massive financial incentive to keep your belt. And beyond that, who doesn't want to extend their legacy with more title defenses? But entertaining the fans in a sport as dangerous as high risk as this, that's a bonus for us. If a fighter is willing to do that, then it's good for them and it's also good for us. But I've no doubt in my mind that a fighter with Woodley's skill set and his limitations would have lost against Wonderboy or Maia if he hadn't fought exactly the way he had. Slow, methodical, no room for error. A striker like Wonderboy is a uniquely tricky matchup who barely needs an opening to find his moment. Just as Demian Maia is a grappler of such tremendous skill, that one misstep can leave you trapped in a world that you just don't fully understand as he does. Woodley was a champion who put winning first, who put getting those championship level paychecks, the pay-per-view points, all the other benefits, ahead of putting his health on the line for our enjoyment. This is something that under a different culture would be celebrated. But Dana, being Dana, actively served as an anti-promoter during his time as champion. Dana did work to actually hurt Woodley's reputation and set a precedent for those who would eventually follow. It's another example of how Dana establishes a culture of fear. In some parallel universe, Woodley should have been praised for finally cracking the Demian Maia code, to stuff all of those takedowns and not break inside what would have been 25 very long minutes. And it's not that boring fights wouldn't be criticized without him, but Dana White most certainly did his part in strengthening certain narratives that surrounded a great fighter in Tyron Woodley. Francis Ngannou. When it came to Francis Ngannou, this was a classic example of how things can sour between Dana and a former golden boy, a promotional darling if you will. Francis Ngannou was rushed into his first title fight with Stipe Miocic. I'm certain that's not a controversial thing to say. The dude was quite new to MMA and had no real depth to his arsenal of techniques outside of that legendary punching power. And when the UFC pushed him so heavily in the lead up to UFC 220, it seemed like he was destined to become the biggest heavyweight star in years. But then of course he lost, and lost badly. And according to Francis himself, the relationship just never recovered. And whatever Ngannou learned about the business at that point, whatever bad taste was left in his mouth, manifested itself in a real dramatic turn, or personality shift, for the Predator as we knew him. He became a far more outspoken presence when issues of fighter pay and treatment was concerned. And when he won UFC Gold, running down his contract and getting the hell out of the UFC became a plan for him. Ngannou wanted a box. He wanted a bigger slice of the financial pie. And the lack of respect that Dana and the UFC seem to have for the hardships of a fighter's life, the underhanded tactics they use to get what they want, how they would punish these professional athletes, that all seemed to irk him, and understandably so. So he left and he joined up with the PFL. And in the time since, Dana has spoken out against Francis many times, branding his PFL deal a whole load of BS, totally refusing to acknowledge any claim that Ngannou might be the best heavyweight on the planet still, because, as he said, that Ciryl Gane decision could have gone the other way. His manager, totally incompetent in Dana's eyes. And as for Ngannou's fighting spirit, well, the guy obviously doesn't want difficult fights, as he said. The usual stuff from Dana, taking a multi-tiered approach to knocking his foes or any potential threats down a peg or two. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this video, be sure to let us know in the comment section below. Before leaving a like and subscribing so you don't miss any of our uploads, it'd be a great help. Okay, let's get back to it. Demetrius Johnson and the 125-pound division. This next one isn't exactly the most vicious feud, but the Demetrius Johnson saga and the story of the flyweight division in general is a pretty wild tale, because let's make two things very clear up front. Number one, Demetrius Johnson is a 1 in a billion athlete, the likes of which you might go years without seeing. Number two, like middleweight in the Anderson Silva days or 205 pounds when John Jones was peaking, and many other divisions, a dominant champion can make a weight class look very poor. And if time has proven anything, it's that Dana White's treatment of DJ, and in particular, the flyweight division itself, was a crazy time in the sport, and proof of Dana's tendency to throw all logic aside and bend to the will of people who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Flyweight wasn't as good as it is today, sure. It wasn't producing contenders that people seem to care about on a grand scale. Hell, I would even say that Demetrius was so far ahead of the pack that it almost killed any hype around a lot of contender fights, with some, number 2 versus number 4 fights flying totally under the radar, often ending up on the prelims. But the way the UFC turned on this weight class and its champion was just ridiculous. Dana obviously has a certain idea of how this sport should be run. You get the fight offer, you accept it, and it doesn't matter if you're slightly hurt. If you want to prove that you're willing to fight, just take the damn fight or else. Demetrius Johnson never moved up to bantamweight again after a patchy run during the beginning of his UFC career, because the guy is 5'3". But in his aim to break Anderson Silva's title defense record, Mighty Mouse's division was all of a sudden in some real danger. To put it simply, the UFC did a pretty bad job at promoting this guy, at giving him the right placements, the right slots. Dana's role as a quote-unquote promoter often involves taking direct shots in the media at the fighter you're meant to be pushing to the public. And whether it was the Dillashaw fight that Johnson didn't agree with, or the potential axing of the entire weight class, which in hindsight was one of the craziest things Dana has ever suggested, there were just so many missteps along the way. When they were talking about entirely cutting the flyweight division, many fighters got cut who never came back. They even cut the future champion Brandon Moreno, who had to fight his way back into the UFC. Anyway, as soon as Demetrius lost a very close split decision to Henry Cejudo, the UFC shipped him off to one championship on a trade for Ben Askren. It was just a total mess. Randy Couture. And finally, we go on to one of the most iconic figures in the history of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. A guy whose time in the promotion goes well before Dana and the Fertitta brothers ended up buying the company. Randy Couture was a 5-time UFC champion across 2 different weight classes, a widely revered figure who just kept winning titles even into his 40s. But Couture wasn't just successful in the cage. By the time he debuted in mixed martial arts, he was already 34 years old, and as a result, he had built up enough intelligence and overall experience to know how to handle himself at the negotiations table. The Zuffa era UFC and Couture would butt heads on several occasions, with Randy often trying to get out of his contract and test the waters of free agency, while always fighting them on the finer details of his contract. In other words, Couture had a certain strength to him, a mix of promotional appeal and actual smarts, and he wouldn't allow Dana to push him around. And this, as you will notice, is always going to be an issue. It's funny how in a sport filled with some of the toughest characters imaginable, so many of them cower under the sheer brute force that is the promotion itself. That's real power, folks. Dana White turned on Randy Couture after his retirement in a very public way, promising the world that the natural was not quite the Captain America figure that we all thought he was, taking any opportunity to try and diminish his reputation. Couture, like Frank Shamrock, another longtime champion who had problems with Dana, has been scrubbed from the history books as much as the UFC can realistically manage. Now, I don't know for sure what went down between these two. Maybe Couture was just as bad as Dana said, but I do doubt that. That's Dana White's MO. He plays a hard game in the negotiations, and if you try to leverage your brand against him or speak ill of his practices in the media, then Dana is going to try and bury you. You could be hunting for easy fights like Francis Ngannou. You could be a real pain behind the scenes like Randy Couture when the cameras are off. You could be a deluded person like Mark Hunt, who has spent years fighting the promotion in the courts. Just like a politician, Dana labels people in an attempt to control the narrative around them. He does this to fighters, he does this to fans and the media, especially the media, to be honest. And the skill involved in crafting such a voice for himself is, let's be real, it's pretty damn impressive, but it is most certainly not right. But anyway, what do you think of Dana's approach to these 4 fighters? Can you see any justification for his stance? Or is this just Dana going totally in on his role within the company, playing the part? Well, do let us know in the comment section below before leaving a like and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single upload. Thank you for watching.